Hello there, and welcome to the RetroSaber Podcast, where we always take the high ground. Now, today's topic sort of sprung itself on me. It wasn't something I've been planning on doing, and that topic is looking at movie adaptations and TV show adaptations of video games. So, where did this come from? Well, recently I was doing a review of the Silent Hill movie, and my focus normally is on critiquing the movie itself and comparing it to the video game. But this particular review sort of went off on a tangent. You see, as most of us will know, the common narrative is that, in general, video game adaptations into movies or TV shows are done poorly, with the finger usually pointed directly at the people creating the show or film. And let's be honest, that is for good reason. They generally do a very piss-poor job. However, the Silent Hill experience, as I would call it, was of me watching a film and having very little understanding or context of the source material. I'd never really played the Silent Hill games to any great length of time or in any depth. I knew roughly what the world looked like and some of the characters, but that was about it. And for me, my experience of the movie was, this is damn good. I really enjoyed it. And I was amazed when I looked back and realised that a lot of Silent Hill fans were really just unimpressed or borderline offended by it. So maybe, just maybe, what occurred to me was that part of the problem is, yes, we are looking for it to link in and remain faithful to the game, and in doing so, sometimes we miss the potential that what we're still watching could objectively be a very good film. However, at the same time, we have to think, who are they making this film for? So, what's this podcast specifically going to be about? Well, what I thought I could do is, similar to my first podcast ever, I'm going to do something of a 10 points to make. I'm going to be identifying 10 particular things that movie makers and TV show creators need to think about or could think about that would potentially improve the adaptation of a video game into a TV show, into a movie. Although maybe one or two of those won't be just about what the creators need to do. Maybe it's something that we as gamers need to consider as well. So, without any further ado, let's get started. Okay, number 10. Pick a story. So this comes about when thinking of a franchise that has multiple games to it. If you think about, for example, the Resident Evil games, the Assassin's Creed games, there are so many of them with so many different characters and stories. And one of the things that can become really confusing within a movie, within a TV show, is when they try and cherry pick bits from different ones. The idea being to create something new and original. But it's not really new and original. We'll come to that at a later point, the idea of creating something new. But when all you're doing is cherry picking bits from different ones, you're not really creating a new story. You're just creating something of a Frankenstein's monster. The better idea, in my opinion at least, would be to pick one game from that franchise and go, this is the story we are telling. Now, how in-depth and how perfectly aligned with that game it needs to be, that's up for debate. We'll talk about that later down the line. But stick with that one story. If we relate this over to the adaptation of a book, and trust me, we're going to make this comparison quite a few times, it would make no sense if midway through Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, we suddenly jump to events from Chamber of Secrets or aspects that come into it in The Half-Blood Prince. It just wouldn't work. And it doesn't work in video games either. I think people often forget that nowadays video games are a fully fledged piece of media, an art form in themselves. You can't just take characters, dump them in together, and expect it to be okay. For people who don't know the context and don't know the franchise, they might think that's okay. But for people who actually love the existing stories, they'll be looking for that story to flow. And yes, that touches on another subject, which is, well, but this is a story people already know. We've got to create something new. Well, no. We've seen again with books, the Harry Potter series, the Lord of the Rings series, they sold very well by copying a story that people already know. Why should video games be any different? And if you stick to just one game, one story, and it's successful, well, even better. You can then progress through the different games. You can even progress backwards and do prequels if you want to. Hell, that's a very common thing nowadays, so why not? Pick your story, stick with it. That is basic storytelling, story writing. It's not rocket science. Number 9. Don't change established characters. Okay, I'm going to be careful about this because I know this is a very socially and politically charged concept. Because this isn't just specific to video games. This is something that happens in many different forms of media, many different adaptations of previously existing stories. And I am not trying to say that there are not exceptions to this. But in general, a video game character is visually displayed for us on the screen. We know exactly what this character should look like. And yes, there might be minor differences from one game to another. But in general, we've come to know this character. We've come to know what they look like. And to some degree or another, that's what they should look like in the movie, in the TV show. Now, the really obvious and politically charged examples of this are not changing their race, not changing their age, not changing their gender. But it's not only that. If a character is supposed to be tall and slender, pick an actor or actress who is tall and slender. If a character is known for having a particular hair colour, and that's a defining trait of them, well, let them look that way. Albert Wesker in the video games is a tall, blonde, white, very pale white man, bordering on actually having an almost Aryan look, which ties into that superior race which was identified in, well, one of the worst periods of human history. And that really ties into what he is, someone who sees himself as superior. It is the core of being able to identify how evil this person is. Having him played in a TV show by a middle-aged, bald black man, who, by the way, is a fantastic actor in his own right, it still doesn't fit the character in any way. But it's not just appearance. The personality and character, the way that individual is portrayed, needs to fit what we know of them. Again, this desire to make their own version of a character just is contrary to making a successful movie, making a successful show. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion on this type of matter, and I certainly am not saying that other people's views are wrong. But for me, I want a character to look kind of like they do in the game. There are going to always be differences. Certain things within a video game would be ridiculous and unrealistic. For example, Sagat in Street Fighter 2 is ridiculously tall and muscled compared to some of the other characters. And it also doesn't fit with what the average TIE fighter looks like. But we can still give him the right overall vibe. He should still be bald. He should still have the eye patch and the scar down his chest. These are simple things. They're the kind of thing that would be so easy to do. If anything, you have to go out of your way to change the character. So why do it? Video games are something that people spend a lot of time playing, and we get to know these characters very well. We get to, in some ways, get a feel for them more than we would in any other form of media, because we don't just watch them, listen to them. We live as them. We live as a character playing against them. We experience them for In many games, upwards of 50 to 100 hours. So changing them around, how they look, how they act, how they're voiced, it just takes your core audience away from feeling like they're really living in that world. They're really watching a movie that is based on the game they love. Number 8, include iconic moments. This can be tricky if the producers, the directors, the people that are making the movie aren't actually fans of the game. I don't mean they haven't played it as part of their research. I mean genuine fans. That doesn't mean, by the way, that they're not going to be good at making the movie. Sometimes the best movies in a franchise are made by people who aren't even a fan of it because they're coming at it from a completely blank, clean slate. But with video games, there are certain moments, scenes that are truly a part of what creates that world. Without that key moment, you're not really creating that genre, that franchise. I think in Resident Evil, that first zombie that we see when its head slowly turns to the left, looking over its shoulder, that is a truly iconic moment in the franchise. So putting that in the movie makes you, as a fan, realise, yeah, that's their version of this. It might not happen in the exact same way, but it certainly feels like it's a real thing. Even in the Silent Hill movie that I watched recently, that moment when she first glances up and the camera pans to the Silent Hill road sign. Well, I saw that in some of the other games, more so, if I'm honest, in videos that I looked up on YouTube of those other games in preparation for that review. But that showed that at least that moment, that iconic moment, was represented. This isn't a particularly difficult thing to do. In many cases, it'll probably just feel like an Easter egg, but fans like Easter eggs. Fans like to feel smart. We all do. If we're a fan of a particular franchise, a fandom, we like to feel like we are in the know. We know this better than anyone. That moment when something happens on screen and you just have that moment, and you're looking around the cinema to see if someone else has got the same thing, and when you see them, you're looking over going, yeah, me and you, we got it. Or you're nudging your friends and maybe they get it, maybe they don't, and you're looking going, for God's sake, look, it's that from this scene in that game, when in this, it just makes us feel connected with. And suddenly a movie that may have only loose connections to a game suddenly feels, yeah, that is what it's like. It's not something that's difficult to do, and yet it gets the fans on board. So why not do it? It's an easy win. Number 7, remember your audience. So when they're making these films, these TV shows, it kind of comes down to one of two things. Are they actually trying to make something for the fans of that franchise? Or are they basically using the name of that franchise to create something new, to appeal to the average moviegoer? Well, I don't really understand why it needs to be one or the other. If you make a movie that appeals to the fans, the hardcore fans of that franchise, you wouldn't be making it, you wouldn't be using that brand if it didn't have a big fan base. Silent Hill, Resident Evil, Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, these are games with a huge fan base. That's why they make these movies, why they make these TV shows, animations, because it has a fan base that want to consume content, that will give over their money to watch a new movie, to watch a new show. They will subscribe to Netflix, to Amazon Prime, specifically to watch a show that ties into that game they love. So you've already got a fan base. Realistically, from that point on, if you make a good movie that appeals to them, why would that not appeal to the average cinema goer, the average TV consumer? If you've made a good story, and let's be honest, most of these games have a good story, or at least good action set pieces that you can emulate, well, it's going to appeal to both. If you direct your attention specifically to the general audience, the average person, the casual viewer, you're never really going to capture that many of them, because there's a reason they're called casual viewers. They'll watch a couple of episodes and then drift into whatever is the newest release on a different channel. But the problem is, by doing that, you've also lost many of the hardcore fans. The fact that the Resident Evil Netflix TV show is more famous for satirical TikToks mocking the dance scene than anything else that happens in it is a damning indictment of that particular show. A show which, by the way, had it simply copied the story of the Resident Evil game, would have been incredible. You have a fan base that are telling you what they want. You know what they want. They want the game. They want the story of the game. It's very simple. That's why they play that game. Maybe sometimes the people who are making these want to be creative. They want to be able to flex their artistic license. There's nothing wrong with that. But when you are entrusted with something that people already have love for, you have a different responsibility. It's not really a matter of pick your audience. The moment a studio comes to you and says, make a Mortal Kombat movie, make a Super Mario movie, a Sonic movie, they are your audience. And you have a responsibility to do right by them. No different to if you're adapting a book. Why would you want to lose them? We've seen that even some poorly made movies like Resident Evil, the one starring Milla Jovovich, were terrible adaptions of the game, and yet, simply because the love people had for Resident Evil, and maybe a little bit for Milla Jovovich, they still managed to make about 6 or 7 of them. I mean, can you imagine how far they'd have been able to go if they'd actually taken the time to make good movies? There are so many Resident Evil games and spin-offs and sub-versions of games, and they could have made so many of them. Man, it's mind-boggling. You have an audience. Pick them. Number 6. Respect the source material. I don't know if maybe some people just look at these and go, it's just a video game movie. Maybe some people who don't play video games look at them in quite a dismissive way. In an equally ignorant way to the fact that maybe some people who don't read go, it's just a book. They're both simply as ignorant as each other. No form of media or art is more valid than another. A sculptor criticising a painter and vice versa would both look like idiots. A composer of music criticising a singer and vice versa would both look stupid. Because both of them are creating art, or creating music. If I read a story in a book, I am picturing that world in my mind, and I'm living it more than anything I'd watch on TV. Ironically, the only thing that compares is playing a video game. And I'm not talking chucking in Mario Kart for a few races around a lap, but I'm talking stories I've played in games such as Assassin's Creed Origins, the whole Resident Evil franchise, as I've referenced multiple times. Hell, even some of the Star Wars games with their own really in-depth stories. There's been so many games where the story has absolutely captivated me. I'm not just playing the game because I want to see the next level. I want to know where this story goes. I want to find out which character is going to betray me. What's going to happen when I meet my dad? What's going to happen when my character is kidnapped by the Joker in Batman Arkham Asylum? The story captivates us because we're not just watching it, we're engaged in it. Books and video games, when it comes to being adapted to the big screen, are the most perfect examples for each other, the perfect comparison. So why is it that, on the whole, and while there are still some flaws, I'm sure, movie makers will show respect for a Harry Potter, for a Lord of the Rings, even for Game of Thrones, until they reach a point where the books stop existing and then they make an absolute farce of it. Why do they show respect to that? But when it's just a video game adaptation, they have no interest in learning the story. Hell, they don't even have to play the game from beginning to end. A quick look on Wikipedia will tell you the general story of one of those games, enough to start a script. That's how simple it is. Fans of these franchises, whether it's a game or it's a book, are rabid. We saw it with the Harry Potter books. People who were fans of those books, they were the ones who were the hardcore ones waiting to see the next movie. And because they made good movies based on good books, they appealed to wider audiences. They respected, with some omissions, and for those of you like myself who've read some of the Harry Potter books, you will know there are omissions in the movies, but we have to be fair. Trying to fit an entire book into maybe a 2-hour movie, it isn't going to happen. There has to be compromises. I don't think you could fit the entire story of Resident Evil, or Assassin's Creed Origins, or Batman Arkham Asylum into a 2-hour film. But you can cover the basics. You can cover the key themes. Certainly enough to make a really respectful film that has the feel and the atmosphere and the basic story of that game. Not everything has to be perfect. Not every character has to be accounted for. Maybe there's too many characters. It might be fine in a game, but when you translate it into a movie where we have to actually explore the personalities a little bit, you have to pad it out with action scenes, not just walking around a mansion. They're not going to be able to make it exactly like a playthrough. But if you respect the source material, you are showing respect to the fans. The fans will show that same respect back and will appreciate what you have given them instead of just criticising what you haven't. Number 5. If you absolutely have to create an original story, at least make it fit the atmosphere and feel of the game. So why do you have to create an original story? Well, first of all, very rarely do you have to, but there are times. What we have to remember is, whilst a lot of the modern games have very clear stories planned out with all the ups and downs of any Hollywood spectacular, some of the older games, well, the story is very basic, if it's there at all. The story of Mario. The princess has been kidnapped. Mario's got to rescue her. That isn't really a story, is it? It's a justification for level after level of platform fun. Street Fighter 2 has a whole network of stories, but when it comes down to it, it's character A wants to beat character B because of something that's happened. They end up just having to work their way through the tournament for a chance to fight that character, beat them, and then move on, and it's usually M. Bison. There's not really much of an actual story there, so often there are going to be times where they do need to create an original story, because the story that exists might be suitable for a game, but just doesn't really work for a Hollywood blockbuster. But if we need to do that, the important thing is to still make it feel like the game. This can be done in lots of different ways. Backgrounds, scenery, music, the costume design, the characters themselves. It's probably a tricky thing to capture atmosphere, because the way I might feel when I'm playing a game might be different to other people. It's not something that's easy, which is why, in general, it's not something that's advised. I suppose This would tie into some of the things we've said before. If you're respectful of the characters, if you make characters that fit and feel like the real thing, you're at least going to feel like they have the right feel. But the format of the game still needs to be explored in some way. The Super Mario Bros. Movie did this fantastically. It created a completely original story. Hell, it wasn't even the princess that got kidnapped, and yet no one cared. No one was complaining that it wasn't right that it was Luigi who got kidnapped. Why is that? Why was no one complaining that Bowser was in love with Peach and singing to her? Why? Because the movie itself presented a world and a feel that fit the games. Mario has some justification for jumping around on blocks. The comical effect of the pickups and the power-ups. All the characters that we see, they're jumping on things' heads. It made it feel like the game. And yes, with a sense of irony and a little bit of humour, almost laughing at it, but in a way that laughed at it with love. The Sonic the Hedgehog movies, 2 of them to date, with a third one pretty much set in stone. The story to those movies has nearly nothing to do with the game, but it still feels like a love letter to the games. The way Sonic is portrayed is beautiful. In many ways, the characters that we see, Sonic, Dr. Robotnik, Tails, Knuckles in the second one, are all done so well that just because of those, you feel that it matches the game. And even the characters that are created as original characters introduced to us are so likeable. They're not there to spark controversy, to make some sort of political point or agenda. They're there to be relatable, to be liked if they're meant to be liked, to be hated if they're meant to be hated. It's simple storytelling, but it creates a world that we can transfer our love of the original game onto. Yeah, they're running around a particular town and then they're saying was it Green Hills? I mean, obviously that's not what it looked like in the game, but the fact that they even call it that is like, oh, that's a nice touch. And then all the Easter eggs still come in. It's an original story, but you find me a Sonic the Hedgehog fan who didn't love it. Same with Super Mario Bros., and I don't mean the old movie, I mean the animated one. They're both completely original stories, and yet it worked. So it can be done. Number 4, match the music. Gaming has got lots of traits to it. There are lots of things that gaming fans look for, but there are a few things often as iconic about a game, as well remembered about a game as its music, its key themes. The music of Zelda, of Mario, of Sonic, they are so famous. The music in Resident Evil, the safe room music, is so well known. There are actually whole YouTube channels just playing those music as ASMR on loop as a relaxation track, because people felt safe in those rooms because they were the only rooms you could be guaranteed no zombie was going to try and eat your ass. So people automatically feel relaxed and safe in real life listening to that music. Some of the best movie adaptions have had music that has either been directly from the games or music that has tied into the games. The Mortal Kombat music from the original Mortal Kombat movie, epic, 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 with sound bites from the game, excellent, flawless victory, the names of the characters, it's so cool. I mean, that piece of music is legit. Go and look it up right now. Just go and look up Mortal Kombat theme. It's the best. It is awesome. But creating a track that either is an adaptation of exactly what's in the game or is something that pays homage to it feels like it, that is always going to help create an atmosphere that the fans of the franchise will love. It's not, I keep saying this, it's not rocket science. If it's so simple, and it clearly is, why has it been done poorly so many times? In many ways, literally doing this, and I'm going off on a tangent from the music point, this is actually frustrating as hell, because the more I talk about this, the more clearly it's easy. It's easy to make a good movie adaptation of a video game. People are always saying about, oh, it's impossible to do. It's so easy. It's just right there. You have to go out your way to get it wrong when you think about it. But anyway, yeah, pick the right music, guys. Don't just pick some random track because it's in the charts or because you've got a deal with this singer or that band over there. We don't want some random track by Rihanna or, anyone else. We want the music that we know from that game. I'm not going to keep saying it's easy. That's getting on my nerves well now anyway. Number 3, don't bog it down with fan service. See, this is probably it sounds like the exact opposite advice to everything I've said so far. But you still have to make a good movie. Fans will want sometimes too much. I hope Nemesis is in it. I hope Mr. X is in it. I hope Wesker's in it. I hope Tyrant's in it. The Hunters, the Lickers, Sometimes you can't get everything you want. Sometimes an 1.5 hour movie that flows perfectly is better than a 2.5 hour movie because you had to cram in a random jaunt over to a different location to see a different character. Just because marketing wants to be able to put it in the trailer. Giving the fans what they want is sort of a double-edged sword. Yes, you want them to go home happy. But at the same time, you are creating a movie, and actually, if the movie doesn't flow, they still won't go home happy. This is probably the hardest part. This is the trickiest part. Hell, this is tricky enough when you're just making a film. Hell, see Star Wars, The End, see Star Trek. What one person might see as a perfect homage to another game, another movie, whatever it is, another person will say, well, that's just copying what that one did. We, as gaming fans, we have our toxic moments. We're going to touch on that more in a moment. You have to give us what we love in the game. But you don't have to give us everything. You don't have to tick literally every box. Certainly not to the detriment of creating a good movie, a good story. That's probably the one thing that I would say I genuinely can appreciate. Veering slightly away from video games here, Star Trek Into Darkness is the perfect example of this. For those who are Star Trek fans or aren't Star Trek fans, I will give a quick explanation. But this is a sort of an updated, different universe to the other Star Trek movies. Like a parallel universe. And in it, there's a whole story arc about a character called Khan. Certain events play out in the same way as it did in the movie The Wrath of Khan, which was the old movie. Other events play out in a flip reversal. Lines are used, but in different ways by different characters. For me, I considered that brilliant. I thought it was really clever and a perfect nod. I found myself sitting there going, yeah, because that's in the other one, that's what happened. But in this reality, it's the other way around. I thought it was wonderful. Other people sat there and went, that's just lazy writing. I'm just as much a Star Trek fan as those are, and I'm sure they're just as much a Star Trek fan as me. But we're still not always going to agree. With the video game, it's even trickier because you still have something of a niche audience, even if it's a big niche audience. So splitting that fan base can be tricky. As we saw with Silent Hill, in fairness, that had some fans that loved it, some that didn't. So, yeah, that's maybe the trickiest one. Number 2, are we doing our bit? So what do I mean by that? Well, as I mentioned in the Silent Hill review, we as gaming fans go in with expectations. And it's not always the same. I'm going in looking, I want Leon Kennedy in this. I want Bayek from Assassin's Creed Origins in it. You want to see nods to Assassin's Creed Valhalla. You want to see Chris Redfield in it. You want to see different things to me. And the thousands, millions of us that go and watch these films are all expecting what we love about the game. And we don't get it. Meanwhile, this random person over here who's barely played, has a rough idea, watches it and goes, bloody good film that. Good fun. Couple of laughs. Plenty of action. What more could you want? Well, are they wrong? They're not. Fundamentally, they're not. For a start, everyone has their own opinion. But it can be a very good film without being a good adaptation of the game. And that's where we bring our baggage. And again, not criticising people for that, in the same way as a lot of the fans of books and stuff like that will carry in, I expect to see this. Maybe sometimes we have to go, okay, it wasn't what I wanted, but it was still good. It was still a good film, or it was still an entertaining film. It was good fun. At least it was funny. That's hard for us to do. It's probably not as difficult if it's just a franchise we like. But if it's a franchise that we're obsessed with, and let's be honest, a lot of us gaming fans, we are obsessed with particular games, particular franchise. We want it to be exact. I have watched every single Resident Evil series, every Resident Evil movie, every single Resident Evil direct-to-DVD animated movie. And I've never been happy with any of them. But I have been able to enjoy some. Ironically enough, which kind of contradicts some of the points I've made, the original Milla Jovovich Resident Evil movies that veered furthest away from the subject material, probably the ones that were easiest to enjoy. It had zombies and a few characters, but an umbrella, but most of everything else was different. That was probably easier to accept than having characters and events, but they're just all a bit wrong, just off, just a little bit. It's hard because we know what we want, but maybe we need to be able to look at things in a different way. Is it a good Silent Hill movie? Maybe not. That doesn't mean it's not a good movie. Maybe we need to be able to separate the two things, because it is possible to make a good movie, even if it's not the best adaptation of the subject matter. Number 1. Still try and make a good movie. I mean, we've established that there's a very good chance that sometimes it can be a good movie, even if it doesn't fit what we as gaming fans want. We've always also established that you can do both. You can easily create a good movie. If you can't, you have no right directing, writing this script, etc. Anyway, you can create a good movie and still make it for the fans, but at a bare minimum, make a good movie. If you haven't got a good script, and again, the game will often, especially with recent games, give you that script. But if you haven't got a good script for an older game, Pac-Man maybe, you want to make a Pac-Man movie, you haven't got a good script, don't just try and get by with random things that I've made on this list. Fan service, here's the music, Here's that iconic moment, but the story's a pile of crap. The best you might get, if you're lucky, is because of a few fantastic performances and a very forgiving audience. They begin to love it with a sort of it's so bad it's good mentality. Look at Street Fighter, the movie of that. Call it Street Fighter. It was clearly a movie of Street Fighter 2. The story was bonkers and rubbish. It was classic 80s action movie storyline. The costumes were dorky and ridiculous and didn't fit anything. They were trying to make... It was like there was constantly a drive to find an excuse to make people look like they did in the game, which it just looked silly. And we wanted to see M. Bison fly because that's what one of his special moves is. So they create this master of like he thinks he's freaking Magneto all of a sudden. And then they throw a few, that pose from the game when they win, and I'm going to do that so it looks like a fireball. And I'm going to do, it was so awful. They were lucky because in the end it became one of those films. Thank you so much to people like Raul Julia, in his own special way, Muscles from Brussels, Jean-Claude Van Damme. They managed to make it into something that people still ironically loved. But God, it's cheesy and awful and painful. You don't want your film to be remembered for that. There's a place for that, but it's never by design. That's not what you're aiming for. Start with a good film, a good script. If you haven't got one, don't make it. Pac-Man fans, would they love a good Pac-Man movie? Of course they would. But if you ask them whether they would like a bad Pac-Man movie or rather have no Pac-Man movie, they'd probably go with no Pac-Man movie. Long and short of it, is it possible to make a good video game movie? Absolutely it is. Of course it is. There's actually been quite a lot of them now when we look back. Most people enjoy at least one of the Mortal Kombat movies, though people might differ as to which one. Super Mario Bros., the recent animated movie, has absolutely trounced Disney when it comes to animated movies. And then, of course, we have the Sonic the Hedgehog ones. They were damn good films, really entertaining. I'm actually quite keen for the third one now I think about it. Resident Evil, maybe I just want to love them. Silent Hill, though, where this all began, it's a really entertaining film for me. Maybe that's just me. Maybe no one else likes it. Fair enough. That's okay. I know critics but then critics never like anything, do they? They're a miserable bunch of pricks. But it's definitely doable. The content exists. In many cases, the story is pre-written. The characters are defined. You even know what they're supposed to look like. All you need to do now is find an actor that remotely looks like that character, that can play that part. So, is that difficult? Shouldn't be. There's your story. There's your music. There's your character design. The work is done for you. Narrow down a script a little bit and get it out there. Your fan base is already waiting for you, so you know who to sell it to. And as long as you make it an entertaining enough story, a good enough film on its own, with a few marquee actors and actresses to appeal to that sort of generic fan base, you're going to do gangbusters. Hell, animated ones, even easier. So, if it's this easy, why haven't we seen more of them? Who knows? Maybe because not enough writers and directors have listened to my podcast. On that note, guys, I'm going to wrap this one up. Before I go, I do want to say, if you have particular fondness for video game movies and you want to listen to some of my reviews of those, I will try and throw the links to the ones I've done so far down below. I think I've done Street Fighter, Super Mario Brothers, and as I say, Silent Hill. So I'll throw those in below. And also, my next podcast, a month's time from now, I've actually got the pleasure of, for the first time, sharing the podcast with someone else. Some of you on YouTube may already know the guy. It is the YouTuber Raza is Retro. He is going to be joining me on my podcast. First time I've ever had anyone on the podcast with me. And we're going to be looking at the Street Fighter 2 sub-series of games, going from Street Fighter 2 all the way up to Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. We might talk a little bit about the wider influences of that series of games as well. But that's going to be something really interesting and something really fun to look forward to. And hopefully, if that goes well, I might actually introduce and bring on other YouTubers and maybe just some other people I know, other friends, other people with an interest in particular topics on to see how that goes. So let me know what you think, especially when that one comes out. Other than that, I would just like to say thank you to everyone who's been listening. Please drop a like on the video, the podcast, still a video, you know what I mean. Throw any comments in below. If you've got any opinions on any of the things I've said, feel free to disagree. Feel free to challenge some of the things I've said as well. And if nothing else, what is for you the best and worst video game movie or series? Let me know that down below as well. If you haven't already subscribed, but you've enjoyed this, subscribe. It would be fantastic to have you here more. And until next time, have a great month, have a great week, have a great day, and take the high ground.